What if, in the silence of the night, you received a warning that changed everything? Imagine the scene: a darkened house, the clock ticking late, a breeze that seems to carry words, and suddenly, a voice soft, urgent, that asks for attention. This is the call that only a few hear, and that's why today we're going to talk about Medjugorje's visionaries and the 7 unrevealed messages that have made hearts tremble and communities prepare. Have you ever experienced this? Perhaps you've felt a tightness in your chest during prayer, a dream that won't end, or an everyday sign that suddenly seems to carry meaning. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. I begin with this because I don't want to just inform. I want you to feel the intensity of the moment, the responsibility and hope that come with the final warning. When we talk about prophecies and mysteries, there are always 2 reactions: disbelief or panic. Our purpose here is different: to bring clarity, discernment, and human stories that show how these messages touch lives in practical ways. Medjugorje is not just a place, it is a meeting point between the visible and the invisible, where visionaries report apparitions that bring instructions for prayer, fasting, inner silence, and family care. The 7 unrevealed messages we will explore are not empty rumors. They carry recurring symbols: the broken rose, the purifying fire, the clock pointing to a decisive hour, and concrete invitations to a change of heart. Throughout this introduction, you will hear key words that we will return to in more depth: visionary, final warning, prophecy, discernment, family protection, always when it makes sense, without forcing anything. I want you to realize one thing: talking about prophecies is not an invitation to fear, but a call to transformative vigilance. There are reports of people who have changed their routines, resumed family prayer, blessed their homes, and gradually felt peace where there was previously anxiety. There are also those who doubt, and the dialogue between faith, reason, and spiritual authority will be an essential part of our journey. In this series, we will hear many testimonies, present patterns that appear in dreams and visions, and offer practical steps for those who want to respond to the call with wisdom. Without getting lost in apocalyptic interpretations, I want you to feel the closeness of these accounts. They are not distant sensationalism, but lives that have found a new direction. Perhaps you are curious about how to recognize a true sign. Perhaps you fear it is just imagination. I will show you simple criteria for discernment and repeated signs that researchers and theologians observe in communion with the experiences of the visionaries. The soundtrack will be discreet, the voice firm as in a moment of confidence, and, with each cut, a fragment of real or dramatized testimony to give texture to what we are telling. And if at any point you feel the need to share an experience, write in the comments, "This message was for me," because conversations like these help us understand the scope of these warnings. For now, just take a deep breath and let the idea of the night call sink in. The question that opened this video is not mere rhetoric. There are calls that awaken, calls that alert, and calls that invite reconstruction. And it is precisely in these 3 layers: awakening, alert, and reconstruction, that the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje fit together. Now, without closing this door yet, let us begin to listen to the first words of this warning and understand what they ask of each of us. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most: a brief experience, a dream, a feeling, anything that came to mind while listening to this, because hearing the stories of those who have gone through something similar helps us better understand these signs and strengthens our community. If you've ever had a sign or a night when something spoke louder within you, share it. "This message was for me," or briefly share what you felt. I'll read it and, whenever possible, include these stories in future videos so we can seek discernment together. And if during this moment you felt like you want to continue watching videos like this, click like, not out of vanity, but because a like is a simple way of saying that this type of content matters and needs to reach more hearts that can be awakened or protected by this message. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. When you comment, like, and subscribe, we are, in practice, creating a support network where stories, prayers, and guidance can circulate responsibly. Subscribe if you want to follow this journey of discovery about Medjugorje, visionaries, prophecies, and the call to protect the family. I promise to always bring you carefully curated information, humanizing testimonies, and discernment criteria that help separate the essential from the sensational. Stay with me, because now we'll enter the first message and hear the words that open this nocturnal call: the invitation to purification and inner silence, and what this truly means for you and your home. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Medjugorje is, in a nutshell, a place that has gone down in history as a meeting point between the visible and the invisible. Small villages, simple churches, and, at the same time, stories that transcended borders. There, a group of people who claimed to have received apparitions and messages began to share experiences that shook the faith of thousands and sparked debate among historians, theologians, and entire communities. What makes Medjugorje so controversial and, at the same time, so compelling is precisely this mix of personal accounts, inner transformation, and signs that cry out for serious interpretation. These are not just behind-the-scenes stories, but events that have a real impact on people's lives and the decisions of entire families. When we mention the visionaries, we're not talking about movie protagonists. They are men and women who, faced with everyday life, swear they heard a voice calling for a change of mindset, prayer, and sometimes a concrete act of reparation. Some see in these accounts a hidden truth about to emerge, and others place reason. First, which is why dialogue with academic and religious authorities is essential. Historians map dates and contexts. Theologians analyze doctrine and discernment. And thousands of witnesses, with brief accounts of transformation, contribute to a picture that avoids sensationalism and moves toward what many call a call to conversion. This blend of empirical evidence and spiritual experience forces us to make choices. Give in to fear, ignore it completely, or seek a balance between faith and criticism. Our audience knows that talking about prophecies isn't about selling terror. It's about discussing consequences. There are recurring symbols in many stories: the broken rose that suggests the world's wounds, the fire that purifies, the clock that indicates a decisive hour, and these symbols function as emotional maps that guide the listener's journey. They are metaphors that demand a practical response, a change in spiritual routine, a review of priorities, decisions about how to protect the family unit. When a family shifts its mindset and resumes simple prayer practices, the effect is often visible: less anxiety, more unity, a renewed sense of purpose that resonates in small, everyday choices. It's this kind of transformation that we're interested in honestly investigating. At the same time, there is the question of interpretation. Prophecies can be read on multiple levels: literal, symbolic, communal, and this is where the work of discernment comes in. It's not about accepting everything immediately, nor rejecting it on principle. It's about comparing accounts, observing patterns, listening to testimonies, and, when possible, seeking reliable guides. Many experts point out that consistency between accounts, coherence with tradition, and the spiritual fruit produced in people are criteria that help separate what edifies from what fuels panic. And when I speak of fruit, I mean tangible changes. People who resume the discipline of prayer, who choose habits healthier for the soul, who opt for dialogues of reconciliation instead of arguments that tear apart homes. These are evidences of impact that interests both faith and those who study human behavior. There's still a human aspect behind the apparitions: fears, doubts, resistance. Seers don't emerge fully prepared for fame or controversy. Many carry weaknesses, fears, face criticism, and yet persist in reporting what they claim to have seen or heard. This doesn't invalidate the need for caution, but it humanizes the phenomenon. When we hear a sincere account of someone who claims to have dreamed of a broken rose and, the next day, changed their routine to better care for their family, we realize that the true message may lie less in the prediction of catastrophes and more in the call for routine decisions that preserve life and faith. It's a matter of priority. Small decisions, made with attention and faith, can prevent greater ruptures. When we observe this scenario with both emotional and rational eyes, we realize that there is a call for personal and community responsibility. If the messages point to transformation, they, in practice, require a review of mindsets: less noise, consumption, more space for silence; less impulsive reactions, more reflective prayer; less isolation, more community. These movements are not empty radicalism. They are adjustments that affect people's spiritual and emotional health. And when an entire community incorporates small practices, a time of daily silence, family prayer, a gesture of helping others, the impact multiplies and begins to be felt beyond the spiritual context in the way people make decisions, in the quality of their relationships, and even in their resilience in the face of crises. There are also, of course, those who seek evidence and documents, and finding them is part of the researcher's job: archives, testimonies, expert statements. All of this makes up a panorama that deserves attention. But we must never forget that the subjective dimension of spiritual experiences carries its own weight. The way a life is transformed is, in itself, a form of evidence. And when these stories are repeated in different parts of the world, similar symbols, similar invitations, converting fruits, it is legitimate to ask if something greater is at work. This is the fine line we tread between the search for explanations and the humble admission that there are realities that defy our immediate understanding. Now, more than ever, it's helpful to remember that interpreting these messages requires balance, and that our perspective must be both compassionate and critical. In many accounts, the call doesn't come as a dry decree. It comes as a gentle invitation to change, a proposal for transformation that touches mindsets, habits, and priorities. For some, this proposal is a hidden truth revealed. For others, a reason for questioning. Both approaches are valuable when used to deepen reflection. If you felt any resonance while listening to this, if there's a memory or dream that came back to you while I was speaking, share it here in the comments. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we talk about unrevealed messages, we're not dealing with a cheap enigma, we're dealing with a careful decision made by individuals, communities, and often authorities weighing concrete consequences. These private messages arise in a variety of contexts: a seer or group experiencing a vision, an inner experience that touches someone deeply, a record that emerges in secret because the recipient understands the time to reveal it has not yet come. There are emotional, pastoral, and even strategic reasons for keeping something hidden, and understanding them requires seeing behind the scenes of faith through the eyes of someone seeking a balance between revelation and responsibility. First, there's the issue of security. Messages addressing sensitive events, forecasts of social unrest, instructions for mobilizations, or details that could cause panic can put people and communities at risk. Releasing information at the wrong time can lead to disproportionate reactions, impulse buying, rash decisions, and family breakdowns. Thinking about social impact isn't conspiring, it's caring for others. When a warning suggests radical changes, some prefer to keep the truth hidden temporarily, allowing time to prepare leaders, inform theologians, and design a pastoral strategy that minimizes harm and maximizes transformation. The logic here is similar to that of a doctor who doesn't disclose a severe diagnosis without first preparing the patient and family to face the decisions that lie ahead. Because the way a piece of news is delivered often determines the practical outcome. Then comes discernment. Not every spiritual experience is immediately suitable for public news. Churches, communities, and researchers establish criteria: coherence of the account, spiritual fruits produced, absence of contradiction with fundamental teachings, and consistency between different testimonies. This process involves theologians, historians, and, in many cases, even psychologists and sociologists, not to discredit, but to understand. Discernment is an art that combines sensitivity and method. It is separating what illuminates from what confuses, in order to guide responsible decisions. When a message passes through this filter and still remains private, it may be because discernment has pointed to the need for maturation, additional validation, or even more time to avoid misinterpretation. Another important reason is to be cautious. With the messenger, seers, and those who report apparitions are human beings with frailties. Immediate public exposure can further weaken them. Attacks, media exploitation, psychological pressure, and even persecution can transform an experience that should be a source of comfort into a damaging spectacle. Protecting the recipient of the message, then, may involve silence, careful silence that preserves the individual's emotional and spiritual integrity, while evaluating the best way to share what has been entrusted. The pastoral and community dimension also carries significant weight. Messages that touch on family issues, for example, may offer practical guidance that requires preparation to follow. Instructions on prayers, rituals, or home protection practices may require supporting materials, contextual explanations, and leaders ready to guide. Issuing an order without this support is dangerous. Creating a support manual and preparing people capable of helping is a way to honor the message and increase its real impact on families' lives. Think of it like a successful launch for an idea to transform realities. It needs structure, training, and follow-up. There's also the dynamic of time. Some hidden truths are withheld, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Some messages make more sense when the community reaches a certain level of spiritual maturity. The analogy is with seeds that germinate better in prepared soil. If sown too early, the seed can be trampled. Thus, silence is sometimes pedagogical, a way of allowing the heart and mind to adjust to what is to come so that decisions are made wiser and less impulsive. In this sense, temporarily restricting access to a message functions as a process of collective calibration. All of this intertwines with the possibility of a final warning, a term that carries weight and generates tension. When it's acknowledged that some messages point to a far-reaching warning, the added responsibility of communicating cautiously comes into play. A final warning isn't just a dramatic alert. It's a call that demands emotional preparation and concrete practices. How this warning is introduced to the public can determine whether it will be perceived as a paralyzing threat or an invitation to transformation. And herein lies the greatest tension. Releasing too soon can provoke fear. Concealing too much can cost families and leaders opportunities to prepare. Therefore, many communities choose a middle path: investigating, preparing responses, and, when appropriate, sharing progressively with support. By observing these mechanisms, we also realize that there are communication strategies that aim to reduce the negative impact without diluting the message. Rather than issuing an apocalyptic warning, many prefer to contextualize, offering practical tools, prayer routines, silence exercises, recommendations for strengthening family ties, guidance on seeking qualified spiritual help. Thus, the final warning becomes perceived less as a sentence and more as a call to restructure. daily priorities and decisions. A transformation that begins with small routines and is reflected in profound mindset shifts. We cannot forget the role of the scientific and academic community in this game. Researchers who study religious phenomena provide an important service by recording patterns, comparing accounts, and identifying signs of consistency or anomaly. The collection of this evidence, combined with the living testimony of those who have changed their lives, creates an archive that allows us to assess the real impact of the messages. And when these patterns converge, repeated symbols, similar spiritual fruits, observable behavioral transformations, the hypothesis that something significant is occurring gains strength, even if the hidden truth still needs time to fully reveal itself. Finally, there is a practical lesson that emerges from this careful selection of what is revealed. Urgency must be managed wisely. Serious warnings call for conscious responses, not panic. The journey of transformation that many report begins with small decisions, adjusting a prayer routine, reviewing priorities, restoring relationships, and these decisions, over time, generate impact. Therefore, temporarily withholding messages, when done responsibly, can be a way to ensure that the impact will be life-oriented rather than chaotic. Now, with this insight into the reasons behind secrecy and the careful consideration of messages, it's possible to understand why not everything is released to the public immediately, and why the term final warning requires caution. If any of this resonated with you, leave a word in the comments that summarizes your feelings, revelation, transformation, or discernment. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Imagine the 7 messages as an emotional map drawn by small flames. Each flame reveals a different aspect of the calling. Each illuminates a segment of the journey, and together, they form a beacon that guides decisions, transforms mindsets, and points to a real impact on people's lives. This map is not a cold inventory. It is a living mosaic, made of symbols, stories, and practical consequences. Hidden within these messages is a call that is not limited to the spiritual. It touches on the transformation of routine, the way we make decisions, the way we prioritize relationships, and emotional health from the inside out. Thinking about the 7 flames is, therefore, thinking about steps of change that begin internally and reverberate outward, in homes, communities, and even in public attitudes. The first flame usually ignites the call to purification. It's not just about rituals, but an invitation to review habits that impoverish the soul. It calls for inner silence, a retreat from everyday noise so that the mind and heart can align. The second flame, always returning as a reminder, highlights the practice of structured prayer not for formality's sake, but as a discipline that alters mindset and strengthens resilience in the face of crises. The third flame brings the urgency of its signals, not to paralyze, but to encourage vigilance and responsibility. The fourth flame focuses on the family as a sacred space of protection and reconstruction, offering practical ways to reduce conflict and increase cohesion within the home. The fifth flame, more symbolic, speaks of purification by fear, a metaphor for transformation that, when properly understood, can drive concrete behavioral changes. The sixth flame focuses on communion and the building of support networks. After all, messages that care for the collective demand a community response. And the seventh call, which many call the final warning, has a solemn tone, not out of alarmism, but as a call for more far-reaching decisions, which require mental, spiritual, and practical preparation. Understand that, together, these flames don't constitute an inevitable apocalyptic script. They function as guiding signs for a broader transformation, a shift in mindset that guides us to make decisions with more wisdom and less panic. There's a thread that connects symbolism and application. When someone understands the broken rose as a sign of necessary healing, that person may decide to seek reconciliation, emotional support, or simply prioritize difficult conversations that have been postponed. When the clock appears as a recurring image, it doesn't signify a cold timetable, but the need to evaluate priorities and act with a sense of responsible urgency. It is in this intertwining of symbolic ardor and practical measures that the journey proposed by these messages becomes credible and usable. Behind the scenes, those who follow these narratives perceive complex processes, the validation of accounts, the work of discernment, and the development of pastoral materials that transform revelation into accessible practices. It's not something that emerges ready-made and complete. It's a craftsmanship that requires research, dialogue with competent authorities, and sensitivity to social consequences. This is where historians, theologians, and researchers step in, offering tools that help place each flame in its proper context. The intersection of academic knowledge and lived experience produces a more solid narrative, capable of supporting decisions that aren't just the result of the heat of the moment, but that accompany lasting transformations. Emotional dynamics also deserve attention. When a message resonates deeply, it triggers memories, fears, and hopes, and this needs to be handled delicately. The transformation we seek isn't immediate. It requires time, repetition, and often the courage to adjust habits that seemed harmless. Changing a mindset often means deciding on a new routine, more prayer, less exposure to noise, conscious choices about what to eat daily. These changes are silent but have a profound impact. They manifest in the quality of family conversations, reduced conflict, increased empathy, and the ability to face crises with greater composure. When combined, these adjustments generate a multiplier effect that transcends the individual and permeates the community. Looking at the series of 7 flames as a whole, we notice patterns that recur across different accounts. Similar symbols, repeated invitations to prayer and silence, practical recommendations for domestic protection, and a clear call for personal and collective accountability. This consistency is what reinforces the phenomenon's credibility for many observers, even though the debate remains open. What matters, however, is the fruit. If the messages, even in the face of controversy, produce actions that improve lives, then they are worth listening to with critical attention and compassion. The balance between faith and reason, between emotion and method, is what allows us to transform a sense of urgency into concrete steps for transformation. There's also an element of gradual revelation. Some flames ignite first, others manifest as the community matures. This means the journey isn't linear. It's cyclical, with moments of deepening and others of consolidation. A community that incorporates a practice of daily silence and family prayer can, over time, notice an increase in emotional and spiritual stability, which alters how it receives future messages. Therefore, the strategy of disclosing gradually, when desired, can be seen as a pedagogical processor way to allow transformation to happen sustainably. At the same time, we need to recognize that not all experiences are universal. What works for one group may not be appropriate for another, and part of the work of discernment is this sensitivity to the particular. Some messages touch more deeply on specific cultural elements. Others have a more universal reach. The ability to identify this is crucial so that the hidden truth, when revealed, generates a positive impact without producing unnecessary disruptions. Now that this emotional map has become clearer with its flames that illuminate purification, prayer, signs, family, symbolic purification, community, and final warning, the ground is set for a more detailed exploration of each of these flames, respecting both the symbolism and the practical applications that can transform mindsets and routines. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. When we reach the first message, the atmosphere becomes almost intimate. The invitation to purification isn't just a reminder that something needs to change. It's a summons that touches the very roots of our mindset. Purification here doesn't just mean external rituals, but a process of inner cleansing, of reorganizing priorities. It's as if someone turns off the lights in the house so you realize where the mess is and have the courage to tidy up room by room. It's in this initial darkness that transformation begins. Choosing what should stay, what needs to go, which attitudes, words, and habits have drained your energy and dulled the glow of faith. There are moving accounts of people who have heard this call in concrete ways. One of the visionaries, in one of her testimonies, said something simple and powerful. That night, I felt as if someone had held my hand and asked me to be silent. I shut everything off, sat on the floor, and cried, because I realized I had distanced myself from myself. This experience is more common than it seems. It's the beginning of a process of reconciliation with oneself, a pause that reorients decisions and sparks a new focus on spiritual life. When the first message calls for purification, it's calling for a state of attention, for the review of every thought and action. It's behind-the-scenes work, invisible to others, but one that has a profound impact on the way we live. Fasting is another essential point and is presented not as punishment, but as training. It helps break addictions, free the mind from excessive stimuli, and rediscover willpower. It's not about great sacrifices, but simple gestures, giving up something that takes up too much space, be it a food, a habit, or even an unnecessary worry. This type of practice reveals a lot about the mindset of those who practice it, because it teaches that it is possible to choose consciously, not just react to impulses. Fasting, when practiced well, awakens lucidity and prepares the heart for prayer. And here comes the central point of the second message: inner silence. In a world that never stops talking, cultivating silence becomes a revolutionary act. Silence is not empty. It is a fertile space where the mind finds order and the soul finds rest. People who have experienced this calling report impressive changes: more patience, clearer decision-making, less anxiety. Some say that, after adopting a few minutes of silence a day, they began to react less impulsively and better discern the signs of everyday life. It is in this space of stillness that many answers emerged, not as dramatic voices, but as calm intuitions that point the way. This process can be uncomfortable at first. Stopping to listen to yourself and God means facing thoughts that have been stifled, confronting hurts that need healing, and recognizing patterns of behavior that need to be broken. This is why the first and second messages complement each other. Purification and silence go hand in hand. When we clear our inner space, we can hear what was previously obscured by noise. It's as if the soul breathes again and recognizes the next step. The practical effects of this calling manifest in everyday life. Couples who had been estranged resume communication. Young people who were directionless find the energy to restart studies or projects. People who were living in anguish feel peace. Upon awakening, these are not magical promises, but the fruits of a gradual shift in mindset. The practice of fasting and prayer helps us see what is essential more clearly, and silence creates the necessary space for this vision to become a concrete decision. Each transformation story carries a kind of mini revelation, a moment when the person realizes they were living on autopilot and must choose again how they want to live. This choice is powerful because it begins a journey of reconstruction that isn't limited to the spiritual life. It affects work, family, friendships, and even health. Purification and inner silence are, in this sense, the foundations of a more conscious life, more connected to what is true. What's most striking is how these first two messages are also the most challenging. They don't speak of external events, but of an internal dive. They don't ask us to look to the sky for signs, but to look within and organize our own hearts. This is the kind of message that can transform an ordinary day into a turning point. And when that happens, other areas of life naturally fall into place, as if inner order creates outer order. Now that you understand the weight of these first two flames, purification and silence, and how they can bring about real change, we can move on to understanding how the signs and the decisive hour enter this journey and what they ask of those who choose to listen to them. Write down, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we talk about signs and the call for a decisive hour, we enter an area that blends the urgency of prophecy with the need for calm discernment. Signs are not mere spectacles. They are indicators that can occur in the world, visible changes in nature, significant social events, or personal signs, those small touches that appear in dreams, visions, or synchronicities that take us out of automatic mode. The challenge is learning to read these signs without panicking. And this is where three essential pillars come in: discernment, community, and spiritual guidance. According to those who study these phenomena, the repetition of symbols, the coherence between accounts, and the spiritual fruit that emerges in people's lives are criteria that help separate an edifying sign from a paralyzing fright. This is a simple statement, but it carries weight. Not just any intense experience should be taken as a prescription for behavior or a trigger for radical decisions. Recognizing signs requires attention and method. First, observe repetition. Symbols that appear frequently in different accounts deserve attention. The broken rose, the clock, images related to fire or silence tend to reappear. Second, assess the impact. A sign that bears spiritual fruit, that brings people together, that invites reconciliation, is likely constructive in nature. Third, check for coherence with teachings and tradition. Signs that contradict fundamental values, that induce hatred or despair, require caution. It's not a matter of disbelieving on principle, but of applying criteria that protect lives and relationships. There's also the psychological component. States of strong emotion can amplify impressions and transform coincidences into absolute meanings. Therefore, community matters. Sharing experiences with trusted people, spiritual leaders, or those trained in discernment helps put the experience in perspective and avoid hasty decisions. When a sign seems to point to a decisive hour, the immediate reaction may be fear. This is natural, but reacting with fear often leads to impulsive choices and bridled purchases, abrupt breakups, reckless financial decisions that rarely produce healthy transformation. Instead, urgency must be managed. Preparing isn't synonymous with alarm, it's synonymous with reorganizing priorities, reviewing mindsets, and making informed decisions. Making a simple plan for the family, strengthening daily spiritual practices, and establishing routines that promote emotional stability are examples of responses that transform anxiety into responsible action. The difference between panic and preparation lies in the quality of the decisions. Panic segregates. Preparation integrates. There are testimonies that illustrate this difference well. Real-life stories show people who, interpreting a sign as a call to a decisive hour, opted for humane and measured measures. They made time for family prayer, sought counseling, and adjusted their work schedules to be more present at home. These small decisions often had a greater impact than apocalyptic expectations. In other stories, those who reacted hastily faced ruptures and regrets. This is not to belittle the intensity of the experience, but to reaffirm that wisdom in action often bears better fruit. The journey of transformation requires time. Internal revolutions rarely occur without discipline and support. Another layer to consider is the hidden truth that can emerge from these signs. What is revealed isn't always entirely new. Sometimes it's a mirror that points to existing problems, relationships, misaligned priorities, a culture of noise that stifles inner silence. Thus, many signs function as catalysts for decisions that are already necessary. The real impact, therefore, lies less in predicting catastrophes and more in revealing what needs to be transformed today. Habits that erode domestic peace. Mentalities that prioritize consumption over dialogue. Thoughtless decisions that compromise the future of families. Reading signs with this understanding changes the way we position ourselves. We move from alarmed spectators to responsible participants. The behind-the-scenes aspects of discernment are also important. There are practical steps that help. Recording experiences, date, context, emotions, seeking parallel testimonies, engaging with people of faith and trained to guide, and checking for physical or social signs that confirm the experience. Experts who study these phenomena often recommend verification processes that require time and care not to discredit, but to protect. And when multiple instruments point in the same direction, symbolic coherence, spiritual fruit, community confirmation, the signaling gains ground. Still, prudence must prevail. No external confirmation replaces the need to monitor the consequences of decisions made based on these experiences. The collective dimension also deserves attention. Signs that touch communities call for collective responses, community prayer, exercises, practical preparations to protect the most vulnerable, support networks that can support those who are vulnerable. Here, responsible leadership makes all the difference. Communities that organize calmly can transform a sense of urgency into projects of care and resilience. In contrast, communities polarized by fear tend to fragment, which weakens any protection or preparedness efforts. Therefore, recognizing signs and responding wisely inevitably depends on the quality of relationships and local leadership. It's also worth remembering that not every sign requires immediate action. Some call for contemplation, prayer, reading, and waiting. Patience is a form of discernment. Waiting is not inaction. It's an active stance of observation, internal preparation, and building maturity. In practical terms, this might mean creating moments of communal silence, organizing listening and study circles, and preparing materials that guide families on healthy spiritual practices. These are measures that build resilience and reduce the impact of shock if something truly more intense were to occur. The truth is that learning to read signs requires mental training and appreciation for silence, a habit of recording, the courage to discuss what was seen without sensationalizing, and the humility to seek guidance. At the same time, it demands practical decisions that anchor faith in everyday life. This combination of interiority and concrete action is what transforms an extraordinary experience into tangible results: greater unity, more peace, a greater ability to face crises without despair. When this happens, the call to the decisive moment loses its merely dramatic aura and reveals itself as an invitation to rebuild. Now, with this clearer understanding of signals, discernment, and how to avoid panic while acting responsibly, many questions arise about how to identify personal versus collective signals, and how each requires different responses. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When the fifth and sixth flames begin to burn brightly, the conversation inevitably shifts to the center of life, family, and protecting the home. It's no coincidence that, in so many stories, the message focuses on the domestic space. The home is where we make decisions, where mindsets are formed, where routine shapes character, and where transformation has the greatest chance of lasting manifestation. Thinking about home protection in this context isn't about amulets or empty gestures. It's about practices that reshape routines, reorder priorities, and have a real impact on people's emotional and spiritual health. It's also an invitation to look behind the scenes of life. What happens before a reaction? What silent habits fuel fear or peace? What small decisions repeat themselves and, over time, determine destinies? The instructions addressed to families, in many reports, are surprisingly practical and accessible. There are no complex demands, but simple invitations that can be incorporated without transforming the home into a ritualistic theater. And it is precisely this simplicity that gives strength to the proposal. For example, establishing a daily moment of silence and family prayer for 5 to 10 minutes, before meals or at bedtime, creates a space for listening and aligning intentions. This habit, repeated, changes the family mindset. It reduces haste, increases empathy, and facilitates more informed decisions in the face of conflict. Another frequent gesture in the instructions is the blessing of the home. A father, mother, or spiritual leader may go from room to room, saying a brief prayer, sprinkling blessed water, or simply uttering words of protection and gratitude. The intention is for the home to become a place marked by presence and responsibility, not just a consumption of time and energy. Concrete practices that any family can implement include creating a prayer corner with objects that evoke faith, or serenity, a candle, an image, a short text, and reserving that space for reading, silence, or dialogue. Holding weekly family meetings to check in on emotional well-being and make simple, collective decisions is also a protective measure. When decisions are shared, the burden falls less on a single individual, and the household community gains resilience. Another practical recommendation is to establish a small reconciliation ritual upon identifying an argument that caused hurt. Setting a time to ask for forgiveness and re-establish a plan for coexistence minimizes ruptures that, over time, erode bonds. These are low-cost actions that produce high impact. Family fasting and prayer, mentioned in previous messages, can also take forms adapted to the domestic context. Instead of major austerities, it is recommended to begin with gradual measures, a symbolic day of fasting per month, a period of reduced media consumption as a family, or a screen-free Sunday to prioritize conversation and affection. These acts reshape the architecture of attention and presence. By reducing external noise and stimuli, the family expands its capacity to hear internal signals, be they intuitions, dreams, or conversations that were previously drowned out by everyday noise. The hidden truth that many messages convey is precisely this: transformation begins with small, repeated choices, not with spectacular gestures. There are also emotional safety practices that appear in reports as household protection, guiding children toward predictable routines, having a simple emergency plan, and ensuring that each member has safe communication channels are measures that increase the feeling of protection without fostering panic. For example, creating a basic contact schedule in case of need, agreeing on arrival and departure times, dividing household chores, and setting aside weekly time to talk about each person's concerns. These seemingly trivial decisions shape a mindset of care and responsibility that, when combined, has a significant impact on family stability. Symbolically, some advice suggests acts of dedication, praying for the home upon entering, reading sacred texts aloud, or even holding small celebrations of gratitude on significant dates. These gestures help refocus the home on a meaningful logic, which changes the way people make everyday decisions, from how they spend their time to how they invest in relationships. Transformation, in this sense, is a slow-paced process, a journey that reestablishes priorities and teaches the family to respond to the unexpected with calm and wisdom. Personal accounts illustrate these effects well. Some say that, after introducing a moment of daily prayer, couples began to resolve disagreements more easily. That a father, when blessing the house, noticed less tension between siblings. That a grandmother who implemented a nightly gratitude routine saw the family environment become more welcoming and united. These are not stories of perfection, but of real change, small steps that, when taken together, have a noticeable impact on coexistence. These stories are powerful because they show that the messages are not theological abstractions. They affect concrete decisions that shape lives. At the same time, it's crucial to avoid empty rituals. Protecting the home isn't about accumulating practices without understanding. It's about adopting habits with awareness and purpose. The effectiveness of these gestures depends on the intention behind them. Without reflection, a blessing becomes a formality. With reflection, it becomes a means of transformation. The mindset that underpins these actions must be one of service and practical love, not fear. Home protection, when well guided, is an act of care that strengthens the ability to face challenges without despair, fostering resilience and solidarity. Another important point is the role of spiritual leaders and local communities in supporting families who wish to adopt these practices. Qualified guidance helps calibrate rituals and offer explanations that avoid seeking advice from qualified individuals. A parish priest, a community leader, a counselor ensures that the measures taken are balanced and promote transformation, not anxiety. Behind the scenes of this work, many communities have created support materials, family prayer guides, simple scripts for home blessings, templates for family gatherings. These resources facilitate implementation and help maintain the consistency necessary for changes to take hold. Home protection, then, emerges as an integrated movement. Spiritual practices, practical decisions, mindset adjustments, and community support. When these elements combine, the home ceases to be merely a physical space and becomes a center of emotional and spiritual reconstruction, a place where small, cumulative decisions produce a great impact. This is the promise many messages carry, not an instant miracle, but a journey of possible reconstruction, made up of repeated gestures, conscious choices, and mutual care. Now that we've seen how families can respond with practical decisions and gestures of faith, there's a connection that invites reflection. How can we make these recommendations a routine without them becoming a burden? Comment: that makes sense to me. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. As we reach the heart of the seventh message, the call many call the final warning, we enter a zone of tension between image and responsibility, between metaphor and concrete possibility. The term itself carries weight. It evokes a limit, a turning point, and therefore, it needs to be treated with extreme caution. There are three main ways to interpret this warning, and they all coexist in the fabric of the narratives that emerge from Medjugorje: the metaphorical reading, the literal reading, and the social reading. Each of these readings has different implications for how a community reacts, for the kinds of decisions that are made, and for the real impact on people's lives. Understanding these layers is essential to avoid reducing everything to panic, or, conversely, to mere spiritual folklore. In its metaphorical interpretation, the final warning functions as a symbolic appeal, a powerful invitation to conversion, to a transformation of mindset, and to a review of priorities. In this sense, the warning points to hidden truths that each individual and each family must acknowledge: hurts to heal, relationships to rebuild, habits that drain life. Seen this way, the warning does not necessarily anticipate a catastrophic event. It announces the urgency of an inner change whose consequence is, precisely, to protect life and restore meaning. This interpretation has the advantage of generating practical and sustainable responses, everyday decisions, reordering routines, prioritizing what truly matters. It is a reading that generates transformation because it converts fear into responsible action and anxiety into spiritual discipline. A literal reading, on the other hand, sees the warning as a reference to concrete events that could significantly impact societies, be they natural disasters, social crises, or changes requiring structural responses. Communities that adopt this perspective tend to take more immediate preparedness measures, emergency plans, stockpiles, support networks, and leadership mobilization. There is practical merit here, because preparing minimizes damage. However, this attitude needs to be anchored in discernment to avoid hasty decisions driven by panic. The difference between prudence and fear is, again, a matter of decision-making quality. Prudence builds resilience. Panic generates fragmentation. Thus, if the reading is literal, the wisest path is preparation with criteria, dialogue, and community support. Social reading focuses on the collective effect, the warning as a catalyst for change in the social, economic, or cultural order. From this perspective, messages function as signaling devices that highlight vulnerabilities already present in social structures and inequalities, leadership failures, erosion of community ties that require collective responses. Here, the final warning acts as a call to public responsibility, encouraging communities and institutions to rethink policies, priorities, and ways of living together. The potential impact is significant because, unlike strictly individual action, it involves promoting transformations that affect the social fabric. But, as always, social action needs to be guided by analysis, authority, and care not to amplify crises through island-formed decisions. Different communities interpret these layers differently. Some prioritize metaphorical interpretations, opting for internal and pedagogical practices aimed at personal and family transformation, prayer, silence, counseling, meetings. Others emphasize the literal dimension, mobilizing support structures and practical plans. Still, others combine interpretations, adopting a hybrid approach, caring for the inner self while strengthening social safety nets. In all cases, the guiding principle that should guide the response is discernment. Listening to experts, dialoguing with spiritual leaders, evaluating the consistency of the accounts, and, above all, observing the fruits of the responses adopted. According to scholars who follow religious phenomena and conversion movements, the criterion of fruit, that is, that which promotes peace, restoration, and responsibility, is often the best indicator of whether a message is being well understood and applied. It's crucial to remember that the purpose of these warnings, when authentic, is rarely to create unnecessary fear. The goal tends to be conversion and preparation, two words that imply conscious decisions and a change of mindset. Convincing someone out of fear is a fragile strategy. Preparing someone out of love requires time, patience, and support. Therefore, communities that wish to respond healthily to a final warning work on three combined fronts: formation, teaching criteria for discernment, and offering practical tools. Pastoral care, emotional and spiritual accompaniment, and practical planning. Measures that protect without generating hysteria. This triad allows us to transform the meaning of the warning, from a sentence to an invitation, from a threat to an opportunity for reconstruction. Emotionally, the seventh message often produces an internal climax, a mixture of shock and hope that pushes toward larger decisions. It's not uncommon for someone, touched by this call, to decide to reconcile, to change jobs that were detrimental to their family, to resume spiritual practices that had been abandoned. These small internal revolutions, taken together, have a real and visible impact. In contrast, when the message is read merely as a pretext to exploit fears or gain advantages, the result is corrosion, community fragmentation, irrational decisions, and media exploitation. The difference lies in who leads, what intention drives the actions, and on what basis the decisions are structured. To illustrate the tone these messages can have when they aim to summon without frightening. Imagine a voice saying, "On a clear night, I have not come to announce the end, but but to remind you that there is still time to choose what endures. The decision you make today will touch generations. This fictional phrase carries the necessary dramatic weight without harming the space of hope. It is this kind of language that many communities seek when translating the final warning into concrete action, a language that provokes without devastating, that summons without crushing. Reflecting on the final warning, therefore, requires a dual approach, preparing the practical groundwork and nurturing the inner disposition. It's not a game of chance. It's a journey that demands courage, a sense of responsibility, and discernment. And when these qualities work together, the impact tends to be reconstructive, not destructive. At the same time, legitimate and complex. Questions remain about the limits of interpretation, authority, and hidden truth that only time and study can clarify. This brings us to a delicate point in our journey. Understanding how these interpretations translate into concrete practices for different groups, families, communities, leaders, and how to maintain the balance between urgency and wisdom. Comment: that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Listen, discern, and practice. These are the two phrases I want you to take away from this. Listen carefully to what touches your life. Discern judiciously what truly requires a response, and practice daily choices that bring about transformation. In practice, this translates into simple, concrete steps that anyone can start implementing today. For example, 1. Setting aside 5 minutes of daily silence for inner listening. 2. Establishing a weekly family prayer that serves as a space for alignment and decision-making. 3. Seeking reliable guidance from someone trained or with pastoral experience to help interpret signs and avoid impulsive reactions. These measures aren't magic, but they have a cumulative effect. Repetition changes mindsets. Small decisions add up, and the impact spreads throughout the home, work, and community. Let's start with silence. 5 minutes a day may seem like little, but they are a powerful laboratory. Instead of seeking grand rituals, try closing your eyes, breathing slowly, and simply noticing what arises: thoughts, emotions, memories. Write down a word or sensation in a notebook at the end of the silence. This simple gesture acts behind the scenes of the mind. It resets automatic reaction patterns, sharpens intuition, and allows you to perceive internal signals that previously went unnoticed. Transformation doesn't come from spectacle. It comes from constant practice that alters the structure of habits. In terms of mindset, silence teaches discipline and attention, essential qualities for making important decisions with clarity. Weekly family prayer is another high-impact tool. It doesn't need to be long or elaborate. 5 to 20 minutes on a pre-arranged evening, a short reading, an intention, and a moment to listen to each member. The goal is to create a space for collective listening, where everyday decisions can be evaluated and reorganized. When family habits are treated as a shared project, the emotional burden is distributed and resilience increases. Think of it as a periodic route review. Small corrections prevent major detours. The practice transforms priorities. What was previously tolerated out of carelessness becomes the subject of conscious decision-making. Seeking reliable guidance isn't an admission of weakness. It's an act of wisdom. Discernment is learned, and no one needs to undertake the entire process alone. Talking to someone who knows the tradition, who is trained, and who knows how to listen, helps separate what is the fruit of emotion from what deserves practical action. Record your experiences, date, sensation, images, and share this material with a counselor. This method avoids hasty decisions driven by panic or isolated interpretations, while also honoring the spiritual dimension of what was experienced. The combination of self-observation, sharing, and accompaniment forms a virtuous cycle that protects both the individual and the community. Now consider how these three practices interact. Silence regenerates the mind. Family prayer reorders daily life, and qualified guidance guides the most complex decisions. Together, they form a small ecosystem of transformation. In terms of decision-making, this ecosystem works like this. When faced with a signal, real or perceived, the person who has cultivated silence will have greater clarity. The family that already practices prayer will know how to collectively evaluate the best response. The guidance counselor will provide criteria to avoid disproportionate measures. The result is a tangible impact. Less panic, more balance, choices that preserve the future instead of destroying it out of fear. There are also a number of auxiliary practices that enhance these steps. Keeping a discernment journal helps map recurring patterns. Recording dreams, symbols, and emotions creates a useful archive for assessing consistency. Implementing small routines of presence, screen-free dinner, minutes of gratitude before bed, a morning check-in hug changes the relational architecture of the home. Preparing simple contingency plans, organized documents, emergency contacts, division of tasks reduces the practical anxiety that often accompanies apocalyptic interpretations. All of this is an exercise in responsibility, transforming hidden truth into measures of care, not ecosystems of fear. In the emotional realm, it's also necessary to care for faith and reason simultaneously. Faith that vibrates without criteria can be manipulated. Reason that disconnects from meaning can harden hearts. Balance this subtle blend of sensitivity and method is what allows revelations and signs to become living works. When we make calibrated decisions, we see the impact, relationships that are repaired, priorities that align, a sense of purpose that gives direction to choices. The journey of change is rarely linear. It is made up of advances and setbacks, of days of discipline and days of weakness. Accepting this irregularity is an essential part of transformation. Behind the scenes of this process, it's common to discover that implementation requires creativity and adaptation. A large family will have a different rhythm than a childless couple. A young student needs different strategies than a professional with children. Therefore, personalize the steps. 5 minutes of silence can be a breather between tasks for a family man. It can be a guided meditation for a young person who prefers structure. Practical application is always contextualing. This is an important lesson. The truth of the messages is best revealed when translated into each person's real-life life. Transformation isn't dogma, it's a life project. It's also worth noting that small victories build internal authority. When a family notices that arguments have decreased because of a weekly prayer practice, or when someone notices less anxiety after establishing 5 minutes of silence, this creates social proof within the home. This internal evidence is crucial for maintaining discipline and strengthening the mindset needed to face future challenges. Insights that come from real experience tend to be more powerful than abstract arguments in practice. Proof that something works is what makes it sustainable. The collective dimension amplifies this effect. Communities that adopt similar practices build safety nets, support groups, people willing to visit those in need, leaders ready to offer advice. Therefore, the impact isn't limited to the individual, it radiates. The journey of preparation, when well guided, becomes a service, not isolation. And this is a crucial point. Responding to the call isn't a self-centered act of escape. It's a community movement of care that aims to preserve life and cultivate meaning. By putting these steps into practice with intention, you transform surprise into a project and anxiety into decision. This is what differentiates those who merely react from those who build resilience. Transformation happens in the humble repetition of gestures that, though small, bring about great change over time. From now on, with this set of practices in hand, we can begin to examine practical criteria for discernment and concrete examples of application in different life contexts. Couples, families with children, small communities, and faith groups, so that the decisions you make are increasingly aligned with good and wisdom. Comment: this makes sense to me. Thank you for sticking around and paying close attention to this conversation about callings, symbols, and life-changing decisions. If this content has brought you something new, subscribe to the channel. It's a simple way to say you want to continue this journey of discernment, testimonies, and practices that help transform routine into purpose. If you made it to the end, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." I'll read each one, and it helps us know who's on this journey with us. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it strengthens the chance for more people to find serious information and inspiration to act wisely. And to continue this search in more depth, there's a video here that complements this topic very well. Click and follow me there, because every journey is built step by step, with care and truth. See you soon.